Hello, Anna. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm so excited to talk about your new book. I have it right here. I've read it twice, as I mentioned. It is fantastic. This is the strangest life I've ever known, a psychological portrait of the one and only Jim Morrison. What
I'm
made
so
you?
excited that you already read it twice.
It's so good. What made you decide to write this book?
Well, the first thing is that I had this paper that I had written for this academic conference in 2016, so it goes further back. And the paper was already called "This is the Strangest Life I've Ever Known," and it was basically the second chapter, more or less, like the psychological part, the Euros and the Thanatos, the persona conflict, the Jim Jimbo, etc. So that part was kind of adapted. And then I presented at the conference, was here in Paris, at
Yeah,
Nanterre.
what conference is this? This sounds amazing already.
Yes, it's really cool. I think they're still going. It's the UPOP. It's European Pop Culture Conference. It's from a Finnish association. At least it was
Cool.
at the time, and they do it yearly, I think. I think it's still going, at least in 2020 was still going, because I was still getting the updates. And that year it was, I don't think it's always at the same place. That year was here in Paris, in Nanterre. And I presented it, I got great feedback, and I was like, yeah, this is cool, I'm gonna put it aside for now. And years go by, and I was doing my PhD at the time. So my PhD, it's about the Beatles. So I was just like, yeah, it's the same era, but different stuff. So I'm not going to do more stuff with this right now. And then I think this was during COVID, because we use COVID as, a common denominator for a certain era. Um,
Mhm.
and it was when Carl sent me a message on Twitter about an article I had written for SF Gate on the Russian embassy, because he already enjoyed that article. He wanted to know about republication. That's when I knew about Franz Wolf. And I was super excited. And, we chatted a bit. And then I asked him if, he was publishing stuff by other authors, Trapart. And at the time, he was actually, preparing the launch of Nina Antonia's book about Oscar Wilde. And he told me
Mm.
that, like, we're
That's a
doing
good one.
this. It was like, yeah. And I was like, maybe I have something for you. Let me, get some ideas on paper. And when I have an idea, I work pretty quickly. And then I sent him a proposal, and that was it. Just I wrote the book for Trapart. Just I didn't, I didn't have like the book written, and I shopped around. I just, stuff just quickly formed inside my head, the structure. And then a couple of things happened as well, because I started getting like research material directly in my inbox. And just
It's
it
magical.
just yeah, it is. Like, when you're on a roll, and that's the way to go, so that's how it happened.
Absolutely. I feel like I was telling you before, I think we started recording, I got on a whole Jim Morrison kick after reading this the first time. And there was a little record fair that came to our town, and I bought all the Doors records. I made sure I had all of them. And I bought all these like spoken word recordings that he did, and the whole like Lizard King poem. And like, yeah, I have like two different versions of that. And like ordered the book of poetry, the Lords and the New Creatures, and then I had to cut it up because the poetry is so like amazing and magical. I was like, this needs to be cut up. But then I had to order like the big book of the whole like big black book collection of like all of his collected writings. So yeah,
Which
I went on
also
a whole
came
kick.
out at that time, right? It was like the collected work, the big volume. And then there was like another volume published like the year after that. It's called A Guide to the Labyrinth,
Ooh,
which is
okay, I
like
need
one
to
of
get
those
that.
facsimile, those super expensive facsimile stuff. And
Right.
I got that on an email. the digital version of that. So I use that for research because the pages are actually, the facsimile pages from his journal. So sometimes you get a different interpretation about, like, how it is. Like if you change lines in the middle of a sentence, the sentence will have a different meaning, and that kind of stuff. And I also like to look at handwriting. I love handwriting. So
Me too. Yeah, I love seeing people's handwriting and their little drawings, like doodles and things.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I have this relationship with poetry. The Doors. I mean, I love the Doors. But even with the poetry of Jim Morrison, because I remember, like, I obviously had heard about the Doors when I was little, but it wasn't like a band that my parents listened to a lot. I think then came the 90s, and then with Oliver Stone's film, like everybody started, I think Gen X, late Gen X, reconnected with the Doors. Yeah, I'm cusp. I'm XY. I'm cusp. So
I'm hard
most of
X.
my friends, like, they were all Gen X, just, and I had this, I started learning to play the guitar when I was 11, and my teacher was Gen X and was like proper rock and roll guitar. Like there was a lot of people, and I was like 11, 12. And there was this guy that he had like a sister my age. She was like 10 years older than me. And he thought like I was cute because I played a guitar, and I was like 12. He was like, yeah, I'm a rocker. And he was into making me mixtapes. Like, you
Nice.
don't know about this man. I'm gonna do a mixtape for you about this. And then I remember, like distinctly remembered, he did me a Doors mixtape. And
Nice.
that's how I got in. So like there's always somebody who's going to introduce you to something when it's important. And then I remember, like, I started buying the poetry books because in Portugal we had the bilingual editions. um
Nice.
all the Wilderness and the American Night, everything was like a published bilingual.
That's
So
great.
just, yeah, so you get into it, and it's a vortex, like you said. Like once you start getting excited about it, it's a vortex. Yep.
It's a total vortex. I love it. And I feel like our time, I'm realizing, I think it must be like a Saturn thing because it seems to be these like 29, 30-year cycles. It's like the 60s and the 90s and the 90s and now. I recently realized that, like, okay, I grew up, my high school was like 91 to 95, right? So like everyone then was listening to like the 60s music, like the Doors and the Beatles and Pink Floyd and all of this stuff, Led Zeppelin. And I'm realizing now that like kids that are in high school now, like the 90s music is just as long ago as the 60s was to us. And that's, yeah, something else. But
That's
but anyway,
insane.
that's really insane. I'm like, wow, they listen to like
That's
Nirvana and they
insane.
think that it's like we think of the Doors. Like that's wild.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes, I'm not that kind of person that's just like, oh, the 90s were just 10 years ago. No, I can't, I can acknowledge it's like 30 years. Like I
It's 30
remember, but I
years
was so
ago.
little, but I
Yeah.
remember 30 years ago. But sometimes you still get those gaps. Like yesterday, I was just, I shared on Twitter that I just remembered, like, the first EP from my first band came out 20 years ago. And I was like, I was a kid. But at the time, like, what probably happened to you when you were in high school, like, when you look at the pictures and you remember everything, just like, oh my God, I was such a kid. But at the time, no, I am an adult.
Totally.
You always think that you're more mature than you actually are. I think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. You feel like an adult compared to a little child because that's who you're comparing yourself to when you're that age. Like, I'm
And
not a little
time
kid anymore. It's like,
and
okay, you're
time
not a little
goes
kid, but
by,
you're not that old.
and it's slow. It's very slowly. Time goes by very slowly. Like a lot of stuff fits in a year because you're loaded with new experiences, right? Like that's why you have a different perception of time when you're younger, because every day is so loaded with different stuff, new stuff. You're always trying out new things. Actually, I think that's the secret for, making time stretch as you age, is keep on trying new things, because time is just, it doesn't exist, it's just the perception. So if you keep on, fitting a lot of stuff into, like you said, like you fit a lot of stuff onto your day, you always have the feeling that your week lasted like a month. I like that, but I have that feeling, like, often. Sometimes I get weeks that I feel lasted a month, sometimes I get weeks that I feel lasted a day. And then I talk to other people, like, don't you feel like this week? And they're like, yeah, why? It's like, it's elastic, we don't know.
We don't know. I definitely think I love that you integrated astrology into this as well, because I've been thinking more and more that astrology seems to have like even bigger part than I realize in things, because I always notice people are going through the same kind of mood things or relationship things at certain periods. And now, like I said too, I think it must be a Saturn thing that like these decades seem to link up or something. And I feel like it must be a Saturn return thing that all these stars die at 27. It's like they don't make it through their Saturn return, they burn out.
Yeah, totally. Because, did you remember your Saturn return? Do you
I
remember what
didn't I don't
happened?
think I knew what it was at the time, but I remember that
Yeah, but like
age and it was
looking back,
wild.
yep, yep, same, same. I mean, I knew what it was, but I wasn't as much into astrology as I am now. And looking back, then, it's the fun part is like going back and analyzing it with the knowledge that you have now, just like, oh, yes. And I know people that are going through a Saturn return right now. It's mostly people Saturn and Pisces, and I get that people are scared. It's like, oh my God, Saturn returns. Like, it's nothing to be scared about, but things are gonna change. Like, if you usually, when you don't, it's when you don't want them to change that they actually change. So
Totally. The
yeah,
way my mom, who
yeah,
says she's not a hippie, who lived with Stephen Stills and David Crosby crashed on her couch and went to this concert where Jim Morrison's alleged exposure happened. She had my natal chart done when I was born, and her astrologer, who became
oh,
my
same,
astrologer.
mine too. Yeah, yeah, like my mom was like 14 hours of labor, and then just before she fainted,
Wow.
after having me, she was just like, clock time for birth
Let me note
chart.
it. Yeah.
The last
So I get the
the
right
last
time.
thing. Yes,
That's
yes.
awesome. Apparently I was like
I
31 hours of labor. My poor mom.
Mhm.
And I just realized, actually, my mom's mom, she died in childbirth, but not with my mom, with like a younger sibling. And I just really, her death day was last Monday. And so I bought her flowers and stuff and put it with her picture. And I was thinking about like what those hours must have been for her. Like, she apparently had like a very long labor, and then the baby died, and she died while the baby was still inside, and the baby's buried with her. But I was thinking, then I just realized this past like weekend that like, wow, my mom had this huge long labor with me, like 31 hours. And like, she might not be as conscious of it because she's not very psychoanalytically conscious of things. She just acts them out. But she must have like unconsciously been really scared if that's the way her mother died. You know what I mean? I just like
Yeah,
realized
yeah,
that this like
obviously.
last weekend.
And it saddens me that it's 2023 and there are still people going through it. Like, I've had like friends having babies like the past year, and most of them, their experiences are not very pleasant. Just women are still treated like, vessels. It's just, if anything goes wrong, you save the baby, and you're just, women are just valid while they're in the childbearing years, all that crap. And we should be ahead. I'm not even talking about social support and economic. I'm not even going to go there because, you know, in Sweden, I have like my best friend married a Swedish man, and she lives in Stockholm, and she had her 2 children there, and it's very different because you have a whole lot of system and support that you don't have in Portugal or France. But I'm not even going to talk about that. That changes a lot. But, you know, the whole approach towards the female body, you know, it's just like it's everybody's business when it comes to legislation. But then when it comes to actual security and, you know, well-being, is just like it's very disposable. And, you know, like sometimes when you don't have children and you're still in your childbearing years, sometimes I think of it as kind of an act of resistance because you refuse to give to a society that will just, you know, you're just good to them as long as, you know, you reproduce, which is like talking like you're an animal, no disrespect, but you know,
Yeah,
that's
but that's
that's
what we've
also
been
why I
for
chose
forever.
exactly, and that's also why I chose to talk about, you know, the counterculture countercultural relationship with women and feminism and everything, because we have this idea that they were all also progressive. And I mean, your mom must remember that, but women are just like, yeah, we want you to be progressive because we want you to be always eager and able to have sex. But you know, we still expect you to go in the kitchen after a rally. You know, and that contradiction, sometimes we forget about it, you know, sometimes we forget about how the most revolutionary factions of society are still so reactionary in those terms. But you know, it is what it is.
Absolutely. No, people still ask me all the time, like, "Oh, do you have kids?" I'm like, "No." They're like, "Oh, but you still can." And I'm like, "I don't want to."
I never did, you
Thanks,
know.
but no. Yeah, I never even thought
Yeah,
about it. I'm just like, no, I just never thought about it.
yeah.
Actually, the only time I thought about it was when I married Carl and I did move to Sweden. I was 39, and then Carl asked, like, is that something you want to do? You know, and I actually gave it a thought. I was like, okay, if I was gonna do it, this guy is really cool and stable. He's a good dad. He was a single dad. He raised his kid. He's great. Sweden has free education and healthcare and all these social service, paternity leave, maternity leave. Okay, if I was going to do it, this would be like the right place to do it. And then I was like, no, I'd rather just hang out with Carl and travel around and do other things. Thanks. And
Exactly.
live
Yeah,
my
yeah.
life instead of taking care of someone else's life.
Yeah, you know, I remember I made sure, like when I turned 30, like I'm 39 right now. But when I turned 30 was the first time that I actually, you know, sat down as like, do I want to have kids? Because this I will be theoretically in my last decade about it. But I know I don't have like a stable relationship either. So I would never have kids on my own. And it was never something I wanted to do. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure. I remember having this conversation with my gynecologist, and she's really cool. And I was like, oh, you want to make sure that your baby box is still working just in case. Yeah, you know, just let's just make sure, you know, obviously that you're healthy, but also that if that is still an option, you know, if you still change your mind. And she said, because, you know, now it's not like 40, like you can, it's not like it was in the old days. You can still extend it if you want to. But I remember she asked like once, and it was just like, I don't think. I was just like, sure, okay. Because, you know, sometimes doctors, they put a lot
The
of pressure on
pushy.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and she was just like, okay, not your thing. It's like, no, no, it's just not, you know, I wish. I'm a single child, so that's kind of sad that I don't get to be an aunt. You know, I feel
I
sad for
have
my
friends that have
parents. You
kids.
know,
They're cute.
yeah, I have that. And you know, my mom compensates with my cat with Prozac. She sends him, you know, gifts. I see her. She's like, she's
My mom sends my
compensating.
dog gifts too.
There you go. There you go. You know, they know. You know, they just like, yeah,
No,
like
I told my mom it's something in my like late 30s. It's like, Mom, I don't want to have kids. And she said, I understand. I was like, that was a good mom reaction there.
yeah,
Not like,
yeah,
oh no,
yeah,
why?
no.
I want to be a grandmom. And my mom was like, I understand. I was like, thank you. because she's a hippie that doesn't think she's a hippie.
Uh, I think like the biggest hippies are those saying, I'm not a hippie. You know, it's always when you don't see yourself as one. But yeah, I mean, after all, like you told me, I mean, she definitely, well, I mean, she saw Jim Morrison live. How cool is that?
Yeah, and she was at
Can you,
Altamont too. She hit
oh,
all these. She
oh,
did not go to
shit.
Woodstock because the people who did Woodstock was like some guy from Miami was helping organize it, and they were all gonna like drive up with like bushels of weed or whatever, and she didn't want to like be driving to New York in like a car full of pot because she didn't think that was a good idea,
It
so she didn't
smells.
go
It's
with
not
them.
something that you can easily feel, like it smells.
Yeah, so I think that was probably smart of her.
But
So she
did
missed
she
Woodstock.
did you witness the you know the stuff with you know the Hells Angels at Altamont? Was she still there or had she
Yeah,
left by then? Oh, she
no,
saw
she
it.
was still there. Mm-hmm.
Did she
And she
confirm
used to
the bad vibes?
the bad vibes. Yeah, absolutely. And she lives in San Francisco like 67 to 69, and she used to see like Jefferson Airplane. They would just like play in people's apartments and stuff like this. And she actually, the funny thing about her is that she like didn't even realize that any of these like I was reading Just Kids but when Patti Smith's book came out, I guess it was like, I don't know, 2016 or something, and like I had it in my car, and she no, I bought it for her because she wanted to write down all of her like memories, like a little memoir. And so I bought her Just Kids so that she could like read someone else's memoir, because that's what you should do when you're like writing, you should be reading, you know. And then she's like, oh, I remember Patty. And she's like, I didn't realize she ever did anything with herself. And I'm like, Mom, it's Patty Smith. And she's like, yeah, I
That's
know. She used to
Patty's.
play at the
Yeah.
Gaslight. My mom was basically, there's this Gaslight Cafe in Coconut Grove. And Coconut Grove was where I grew up, was like the hippie area of Miami at that time. And it was a sister like spot to the Gaslight in New York in the Village. So like they would send all the same acts down that would play in New York. And so like everybody played there. And she was like the only waitress for this little place. And yeah, so she like hung out with everybody back then,
Oh, I
so
love it.
she had a fun life. But yeah,
Nice
she
to
doesn't
hear.
like celebrate it. She's like, she's one of those like, oh, that was my younger years, you know. But it's like, Mom, that's so cool.
Yeah. When you see people like I have this friend from Los Angeles. He was one of the original producers and screenwriters for Beverly Hills 90210. And you know we became friends because I was on their podcast, and then he helped me with some stuff that I'm working on as well. And his name is Larry Mullen, and you know he's from that generation, and he was in LA at the time, and he traveled a lot. And sometimes, you know, I will just post something like, you know, a Janis Joplin record, and he will comment like, oh yeah, I remember seeing her, you know, playing, you know, I don't know, the Fillmore. It's just like, you saw Janis Joplin? Oh
It's
yeah, she
so
was really
cool.
cool. It's just like, what the fuck? Like you saw all these people. Yeah, I remember Jimi Hendrix was there as well. It's like, well, fuck.
Yeah, it's such an iconic generation. So it was such an iconic
Yeah,
time. But
yeah.
yeah, like I said, I feel like now really resonates with them, as did the 90s. There's like this kind of spirit of upheaval, and everybody's kind of sick of the man, and you know, like there's this kind of countercultural push that's trying to really overthrow this kind of old way of being that continues to persist somehow, even though yeah, it really should have died out by now.
Yeah, I mean, it's cyclical, right? But the thing, like, sometimes people ask me, like, why? Because I study the 60s a lot, like, particularly countercultural 60s for even, you know, my research with the PhD and everything. And people ask me, like, why, in your opinion, like, why aren't we getting more, you know, revolutionary, you know, youth is more revolutionary now? And they say like there's this crucial factor, especially I'm talking about, you know, Western civilization, because we're always talking about Europe and the United States. Like we can, you know, I don't even, you know, I have an idea about like other countries, but it's a different reality. But it's like the 60s, like you were so well off economically if you wanted to. Like you could just, you know, drop out and just get part-time job and would be like this, and you would pay like with that you would pay for a room easily, center city, and you didn't have to do much. And right now people are fucking hungry. I have friends with like 3 jobs and they can barely afford to pay the rent, let alone think about anything else, or think about or having like free time to be creative and dedicate themselves to something else other than making money. And it's not, I'm not talking about making money for the sake of it. I'm talking about making money to survive. So I said that's why it's very unlikely that we will have that kind of upheaval, because sometimes we forget that, first of all, like counterculture wasn't consensual. It wasn't like every single, like, not everyone was like your mom. Like, there were a lot of squares, like youngsters that just wanted to continue with the great 50s generation. And second of all, it's like, these were privileged people. These were people that grew up with everything. And in order for you to be against something and revolt against something, you need to have tasted it first. And I think that's the big difference. You can't be, you can, but I'm sorry, Prozac is just singing in the background.
It's great.
Yeah, you can't be against something if you haven't tried it yet, because you won't know. And it will always, if you're protesting against something that you haven't tried, it will always sound like sour grapes. And for me, like, seeing this like after 50 years, because history, you start analyzing history after 50 years. You can't analyze it first, because that's considered contemporaneity. So you need to have at least half a century. And when you look at it, it's just like, these are privileged people. So it just now you have a few privileged ones, but those aren't the ones doing the revolution. So the others, just sometimes people are just too tired to complain, and I totally get it. People are tired. I still think.
Yeah, and it's by design. They keep people like
Yeah,
broke and hungry and having a bunch of kids so they can't fucking
exactly.
Yeah.
I still think I've been defending this ever since the pandemic. I think that we should all like collectively go to sleep for a couple of
Stop
months.
working.
Like, everybody, like the whole world, like in Sleeping Beauty, when the whole town goes to sleep, when she also enters her deep sleep and everything around her stops. I think we should all like, if it was humanly possible, like the whole world for a couple of months should go to sleep, because the way that things are right now, we're very, very tired, and we're throwing a tantrum, like those kids that, I'm very tired, I want to go to sleep. So they start, hitting things, and I don't want to go to sleep. But we're just throwing tantrums and just getting more and more tired. If we see as ourselves, like, that's part of my book as well, like saying civilization as this is psyche, like Norman O'Brien said, like, our psyche is very burnt out. Our collective psyche is very burnt out. Like, we should go to sleep. But
yeah, and it showed that during the pandemic that we could stop everything if we wanted to. We did stop everything when we needed to with the lockdowns and stuff. And so yeah, if we all like collectively like stopped working and feeding this like economic machine, maybe the powers that be would have to start changing things, like investing in clean energy and stuff like that.
But power.
Yeah, they rushed us back into working in business as usual, and then we're gonna have some other big disaster, but we'll see. Whatever.
I mean, you see that with all those companies, they're saying like remote isn't an option anymore, and just like, it was an option, very fine option, like a couple of years ago. Why isn't? Because you
It's a
can't
great
control people.
option. Yeah, because you don't want. It's better not to commute and all sorts of stuff.
And you
I'm
save a
glad
lot of
I
money.
dropped out and moved to the country, but that's also like a privileged thing to be able to do.
Yeah, I always say that. Like I can't talk specifically about my situation because I'm, in pretty much a privileged situation that I can allow myself to, make my own schedule and everything. But um, I look around me and I mean, you're not an island. So when you look at the world around you, and I think that's what makes us even more tired is on one hand, you can't be aware of everything that's going on around you because you will get overwhelmed because you can't act on it. There are a lot of things that will escape you that are out of your control and you have to accept it. But at the same time, you can't be alienated from everything. You can't just, bury your head in the sand and, nothing's going on, the world's fine. So you have to navigate all these two realities at the same time, and that sweet spot, that's kind of Venn diagram, right? And that there's kind of a sweet spot, and for you to stay in that sweet spot, that takes a lot of effort, and that's why we're tired, because we need to keep up with what's going on, but at the same time we can't go too deep into it, otherwise, I've seen, best minds of my generation, like Ginsburg said, they're all going mad with that. So yeah, so we'll see. It's like you see, like we'll see. And I mean, the other day I was talking to my mom and I just told her, like, we're right in the middle of a transition. Like everybody knows that, especially astrologers and occult people I work with. We know that, but what's more difficult, and I think that's why things are so confusing, is that we're changing paradigms. And it's not the first time that happens, it happens every other era, but the old paradigm is already dead and the new paradigm hasn't arrived yet. So we're trying to solve problems using solutions that are no longer viable because they're obsolete. They belong to the old paradigm, but at the same time, they're the only solutions we got because we haven't gotten to the new paradigm yet. So that's kind of confusing and everything seems very pointless. So like I don't have answers. I'm just, just throwing words. I don't have answers. Just like it's just my perception.
Make art,
But
write books like this. Actually, last for Jim, this is gonna come out on Jim's birthday. So happy birthday, Jim. This is our
Birthday.
celebration of you. And last year on his birthday, I made this collage of him. Also
Oh,
inspired
I
by the
remember
book.
seeing it. I love it. I love
That's
it
when I
so,
started
so
cutting
much.
up all these words are words from him. Ooh, let's see what they say actually, because his oh no, I used different cut ups. I used his words mixed with my own cut ups. Should we see what it says?
Okay, but
I remember it
that's
was
interesting.
really good. And this is the cover of the book that I bought that I started cutting up. That's where I got that great
Yeah,
picture.
like I remember like seeing it and was just like, damn, this would also have been like a good cover for my book.
Oh
Like
yeah,
I
that's a
could
good
have loved.
point. But it's the cover of his book. But this is so good too. This is
Yeah, I
Carl's
know. That's
actual photo from the cemetery.
when I saw it, I was just like, this is perfect.
That's
Because I never
perfect.
got to see the statue.
Me
I go
neither.
there all the time. It's
It's so
gone now.
good. Carl's so
So
lucky he's gotten to do so many cool things like that. Like go to Brian Jones's grave with Genesis. Come on. Iconic. Anyway. Okay, but let's see what Jim says. Let us see. I love cut up poems. Expanses. The breast is of sexuality. Cinema in, seen in any magazine. Inevitable progress uniting the two. Notion of a deity, eyes like the child's. Views identity as illusory. In the palm of one's hand. Cure blindness with a whore's spittle. And real life begins. Some activities are impossible, change terribly in their reeking seats, or Rome, scene for curious America, superb, cameras, worlds, vacuums, travel along beside to move. When sex dies, it becomes climax, and naked, sometimes offered themselves up to in the open, and these secret events are the voyeurs, the bird or insect that stumbles into a room. This spell of passivity, our actions are cruel. The dadas also explored, whirlwind of interest, saying it was initially tricky to persuade. Psychoanalysis, reimagining, impossible selection, moment of freedom, released his seminal unconscious, instinctual, remains fundamentally all the arts of vicarious existence, eyes and runs down the cheeks. Farewell, Jim Morrison. Wow, that's
Oh
a good poem.
God. It sounds like a spell, but at the same time, there was a part there that reminded me of Yai Ching.
Nice.
It
Yeah,
was
they're
kind of,
divinatory.
yeah. I was just like, oh shit. You just go into it.
I'll
Oh, it's
send you a
so
scan of
good.
it so you can read it and have all the words.
Please,
Yeah, and I
please.
also
Yeah.
made
I
this
remember
oil for
seeing.
him. Sometimes I have very few people I've made oils from. This I made back in New York. Probably in 2015. I made an oil for him. And basically when I make oils, I like put in ingredients that I feel like represent the person and listen to their music, read their poetry, a lot of things. And I usually work on it from like a birthday to a death day. So I think I worked his opposite, like July 3rd to December 8th, his death day to his birthday.
Which is also, July 3rd is also Brian Jones' death, that's kind of one of those dates, right? Yeah, it's but I think Jim Morrison, from all those people are phenomenal and magical in their own way, but it depends on how they hit you, the way they hit you. Like I remember Jim Morrison was always there, like in key moments of my life. Like I lost my virginity to the Doors, so
Nice.
yeah, like, I remember that, and it wasn't my choice. I mean, it was the guy I was with that put the Doors record on, so it was kind of there's, but I think it goes with the personality, and I think you agree with me on this. It's one of the most sexual, overly sexual icons of that era. I mean, the era is already very sexual, but Jim Morrison performed his sexuality in a very unique way that it kind of, it's very sacred and very profane at the same time, which is why I actually, I love it, because I see sex as a very ritualistic thing, and I think he saw it too. He's very eighth house, right? He's very sex, death, taxes. I don't know about that part, but just
But sex and death for sure.
yeah, it is very. I remember talking to that when I was doing the astrology part of the book with SJ, and we just did like a Zoom to analyze his chart, and he was like, "Yep, eighth house," just went straight into it, and that's actually in the book. And I remember he telling me, "No, I I looked at his chart, and like he's one of those people that." His mission in life was to die. That was his primary mission. That's what he came here for. That's what made him well known, and that's very, very visible in his birth chart. And I think that's fascinating.
It's so interesting. And what do you hope people get out of the book or take away from the book?
I want him to go into Doors Vertex, just like you.
Yes,
Just
it worked
I
on me.
I want to send them into just either a discovery or a rediscovery, or a reinvention about their perception of Jim Morrison, because that was also one of my goals with the book, is that I think I was talking to a journalist friend the other day, and just like, I think we need more women writing about classic rock, because most books that we have, like Jim Morrison, Bob Dylan, and that stuff, were written by men, and that's male gaze. That's a man-oriented narrative, and whenever you try to write something that deviates from the the normative narrative that exists about that icon, just like, oh, you don't understand shit because you're a girl, and girls don't understand how men feel music and rock, and you get that all the misogyny that comes with it. So hopefully, I wanted to, because I really like Jim Morrison, but liking somebody and his work and, for poetry, music, you name it, it doesn't give you carte blanche to just just see it as an untouchable icon that has no flaws. And that's what I wanted to show, is like, you can still have those flaws, you can still humanize a character, and that character can still be, it's a paradox, but can still be a god. You can humanize it, and then send them back to the pantheon, but rehumanize, just, it's a change in perspective. I guess that's one of the things I wanted to achieve with the book as well. Just give a different perspective.
Yeah, and it's really fleshed out, and like you do the era and the man and the myth and the psychology and the astrology and the music and the poetry and just like all these aspects. And we won't give it away, but there's also about his death that everybody has to go read the book to see, but there's a different narrative than the one that's blatantly given.
Yeah, and that's the French narrative. Because I saw like a lot of French documentaries, and I've talked to some people, because it people hung out with him so at the time, and I know like a couple of people that knew him, and it's so different from what you see about the conspiracy theory. Is he really dead? It's so different. It's just a series of events, of unfortunate events. But I won't give it away. And then you have all the addresses. Like if you're planning a trip to Paris, I give out a lot of addresses. Like if you want to do your own Morrison itinerary, you have like streets, number. You can do your own, follow in the footsteps of Jim if you want to. Like if you're, it's just this holiday suggestion, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm actually, I don't think they'll listen to this. I'm getting this book for both of my parents for Christmas.
Oh,
This is their Christmas gift because they're
I
both
want I want
from that
I would
generation.
want their feedback actually. I'm super curious, especially your mom. Like I'm super curious about their feedback. I can't wait, to hear more about, now that the book is out and people will start reading it. And I'm really excited because, a book is only alive if it reaches people and people respond to it and they add to it, because otherwise, the book is dead. You need to keep it, reading through interpretations and all that kind of stuff. So I can't wait to hear about, what people think about it, what people, even if they say, no, I don't agree with you at all, well, that's fine. Just this is a perspective, this is a possible viewpoint, as I say in the book. Like I can imagine Jim Morrison, like wherever he is, like with his leather pants, just that pose that we all know, just reading the book and just like fucking bullshit, just having like a good laugh, just what does this girl know, just having,
She
but
knows a lot about
genuinely.
French philosophy and psychoanalysis.
Yeah, I mean, he really enjoyed that. So that's what I tried to do. I went to his favorite authors and just like, oh, you like that author? So I'm going to use this author to analyze you. How about that, Jim? Let's do this.
Exactly. I love it. I think it's great. And I highly recommend it for everybody listening. Is there anything you want to mention? Oh, I know. I don't think I mentioned when we were recording that my mom was at that concert in Miami, and then she said that everybody took off their clothes. The whole
Oh, no.
audience was going wild. And apparently the stage collapsed and stuff. Like it was a whole scene. I'm
Yep.
very sad that the Miami government gave him such grief.
That I think there was this pardon a couple of years ago. I remember reading about it, like
Right.
40 years after, just like, oh yeah, the
When he's
Dade
dead.
County. It's like, seriously? But there is no video recording of the concert, because how would they know? But there is an audio recording which I used for the getting the sentences right and the order of events, and you can actually hear the crowd going wild, and all the songs just being cut off. And I actually feel for the rest of the Doors, because I think that besides Ray Manzarek, I think the other two would just getting really tired about it, because Raymond Zarek was very spiritual as well. So I think he kind of he went along with what Morrison did. But John and Robbie, God bless them, they're still among us. I think they were very, come on, man, we just want to play rock and roll. What the fuck are you doing? There he goes again with another poem. Okay, let's just do drum roll. Yeah. Solo. Yeah, is the poem okay? It's not over yet. Another drum roll. Well, it's just
I love it. I love when he
sorry.
goes in those tangents. I think they're so great. And I think it's
There
another
he
great
goes
thing that
again.
you point out in the book that, like, these kinds of, I mean, people need these ecstatic events. Like, people talk about it, ecstasis, like with rave events and these kinds of concerts where everybody would go wild. And it's something that's been part of like human culture forever. And we didn't really have a place for it in this kind of white Western, culture of this time. So it's interesting that people kind of found a way to have those experiences anyway through like rock concerts and things.
Yeah, it's. I mean, spirit. I'm sorry about my cat. He's like he wants to sing as well, like Jim. But I think it's like it's part of the great spiritual crisis of the West, right? We always need spirituality. Yeah, we do. And I think that's one of the biggest problems right now, is that people are not, and that was one of the biggest problems then, like people are not satisfied with the options they're giving by institutions, and most Western institutions. And at the same time, some people have money, that just worship money, and that's it. And but you always feel like a void, like you start buying and consumerism and everything, but you get to a point that you're just like, there has to be something else. And I'm not even talking about afterlife. That's a whole other matter. I mean right now, like in this life, like you're alive, there's a whole dimension. And I think like live music concerts and that kind of events, like mass events, can be replacements, like collective replacements for rituals. I mean, they're a ritual in itself, but I mean like spiritual rituals, because you feel a kind of energy that can go like really good and really bad, like you mentioned, like we mentioned at Altamont, because it creates a kind of synergy with the collective energy that you see in in churches and rituals of all kinds. So I that's why the rock icon can function as a kind of a prophet, because it's not himself that declares himself a prophet, it's the people that follow him that declare him as such. So there's always a parallel between these things. Yeah.
Totally. Is there anything else you wanted to mention that we didn't get to that you want to talk about before we wrap up?
uh I don't think so, because I'm just afraid that I would give too much away, and I
Yeah.
really
And they
want,
have to go get the
I don't
book.
want to. Yeah, and I don't want to give my opinion, because I don't want people to go read the book like with a bias about like, oh, she's already going to talk about this. So just enough tease. I think we did enough teasing.
Yeah.
I think we
What are you
did.
working on now?
I'm working like on a couple of stuff that I can't
We'll
talk
find
about
out.
yet. But when the time comes, I will let you know. I'm a couple of like really exciting stuff.
Cool.
Diving into again discographies, and I love research, just that's why I did my PhD. Like I love research, and I love discovering new stuff, and then uh, seeing like there's a different way from point A to point B that the one that you've been told. And that's I'm mostly mercurial by nature, so I'm very curious. I'm always moving really fast. I'm always like, we're here talking, I'm always like just moving, and I'm just like itching to read more and talk more and see more and more and more and more. So
Good. Well, I
when the
look
time
forward to
comes, like
having you
you
back
will
where
be
you
one
can
of the
talk
first.
about your other things when they come out.
Yes, of course, always a pleasure.
Yeah. And yeah, like I said, I'm going to put this out on Friday for Jim's birthday.
Oh, that's really cool. Can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.